So navigating the CLI, CLI is the command line interface. Now, in the previous chapter, we talked of the operating system. We said the network operating system for Huawei devices is actually called versatile routing platform. Now, we said the purpose of the operating system, which is the system software, is to help manage the hardware of your device, including things like the CPU, the memory, and any other hardware equipment. Hardware is what is tangible. Now, it also manages other applications and allocates resources such as memory and CPU time to those particular applications. Now, in order to manage this particular application software and hardware, the operating system will usually provide what we call an interface. Remember, we said that one of the components of a computer is the user. So the purpose of the interface is actually commonly referred to also as a user interface. The purpose of the interface is to allow the user to operate the machine actually. So the common interfaces that are provided, user interfaces that are provided, include the GUI or graphical user interface, and we also have the CUI or character user interface. The character user interface sometimes is also one of the examples. So with the graphical user interface, you're talking of using icons, menus, things that are visible to interact with the computer. With the character user interface, you're using the command line. You're using the command line interface to send commands to the computer, the command line interface. So command line interface is character-based. You use character commands to configure the computer. So in this particular topic, we're just going to see in VRP, how do you navigate within the command line interface that is provided by VRP. So in some network equipment, you have both the GUI and the CUI. But in most serious and managed network equipment like switches and routers, you only have the CUI, the character user interface. So the implementation of Huawei devices in an enterprise network requires a level of knowledge and capability in the navigation of the VRP command line interface. And configuration of system settings. So the principal command line architecture is therefore introduced as part of this section, along with navigation, help functions, and common system settings that are required to be understood for the successful configuration of VRP managed device. By the end of this chapter, you should be able to, Wes here? Is Wes here? Chris? Okay, Lynn, go ahead.
Navigate the VRP command line interface, configure basic VRP system settings, perform basic VRP interface configuration and management.
Okay, thank you very much. So let's see how that is done. So the very first time, one of the first things that you'll have to do is to start up your device. Starting up your device in IT is also commonly referred to as booting up, booting up your device. Now, when you do this for the very first time, you'll when you boot up your device, either a router or a switch, you get information such as the location from which that particular VRP is being loaded from. So for example here, it is actually being loaded from the flash memory, as you're going to see, and the actual file that has the VVRP is actually that particular file. So you can also be able to see the version of that particular VVRP from the name of the file, and the extension is .cc. Now, when you're starting it again for the very first time, when it has the industry default settings, it will ask you this question: do you want to stop auto configuration? So you have two options when you're starting it up for the very first time. Auto configuration is if you want to be led through in configuring the basic device settings. Just like it's like you want to use the default device settings. So if you want to be led through that process, then you can choose no. So you enter N there. Do you want to stop auto config? You choose no because you want to be led through. So that is what we call auto configuration. Then the other option is you simply begin your configuration manually from scratch. So most of the time that's the option you'll go with, and therefore you have to enter Y for yes. That is, you want to stop auto config so that you can configure everything manually from the beginning. So in order for you to be able to configure, in order for you to be able to configure different settings in your VRP, you need to understand this particular command structure. To be precise, the command structure has been organized hierarchically. Hierarchically means that in order for you to configure particular parameters, you must be able to get into a certain view. They're called views. So the very first view in the hierarchy is called the user view. In the user view, you can only be able to view the running status of the device and some general statistics about the device. So you can only be able to just see some stuff, but you cannot be able to configure the system parameters. It is in the system view that you can be able now to set different parameters of the device, as we are going to see in a short while. Now, when you are in the interface view, you can now be able to get into either, when you're in the system view, you can now be able to get into the interface view or the protocol view. The interface view is used to configure parameters for an interface or a port. The protocol view is used to configure parameters for protocols. So for example, we are going to learn about so many protocols like DHCP, OSPF, and when we learn about those protocols, we are going to configure them inside the protocol view. So this is the hierarchy of the command line view. Now, in this particular demonstration here, we are in a switch or a router, and you know which view you are in by this particular symbol here. So for example, when you have this greater than and less than sign, then you're actually in the user view. You're in the user view. So when you have this, then you're in the user view. On the other hand, when you're having these square brackets, when you're having the square brackets, then you are in system view. So to get from the system view to system view, you enter this command, system-view. Now, once you get into the system view, you can actually get into an interface view by typing the keyword interface, then the name of the interface, then the number of the interface. So once you do that, you can see that the prompt changes. Now, so far you've been seeing this Huawei, 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 Huawei. Now, this is the name of the device. This is the name of the device. So when you enter the interface view, the prompt changes to the name of the device, hyphen, then the name of the interface and the number of the interface. And therefore, at this prompt, now you can be able to set a number of parameters that are related to this particular interface. For example, the IP address, as we are going to see shortly. So please remember these views. Most of the time we will be talking about the user view, system view, in which view are you? And one thing that is important to note is you can only be able to perform certain commands in a particular view. So for example, we have a command called the save command. You can only use it in the user view. You cannot use it in the system view. So if you need to save, you need to go back to the user view. Okay, Jay Butala, you raised your hand. Who is this, by the way?
It's Benson.
Oh, okay, Benson. Go ahead.
I just wanted to ask, like, the name of Huawei, the name of the device, can it be changed or it's there by default and you just have to use it that way?
So Huawei is the default, but yes, you can change it. In fact, it's the very first thing you should do after getting into the system view. You should change the name of the device.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you very much for that question. So let's look at some of the functions that you can perform in CLI. Just like many other operating systems, VRP also provide us with what we call keyboard shortcuts, shortcut keys. So, for example, in this first example, we're seeing here Control A can be used to move the cursor to the beginning of the current line. To the beginning of the current line. So sometimes you might type a command that is quite long, but you see, the very first word you typed maybe is not correct. You didn't capture that, you misspelled that word. So if you want an easier way of jumping back to the very first word that you typed, you press Control A. Control C, for example, is used to stop performing a current function. So for example, when you do the ping command, by default, it should send 5 requests. But if you've gotten 3 replies, you can stop it from continuing to send the request and getting replies by pressing Control and C. So Control plus C means you've pressed down the Control key continuously, then you press C. Then Control Z is used to return to the user view from whichever view you are in. So in fact, this particular illustration here shows the use of Control Z. So in the user view, we can type the command system view to get into the system view. And now in our keyboard, we can press Control Z to get back to the user view. And we have many others which you should check in the notes at the bottom of this particular slide. So for example, Control plus that particular left-facing square box is used to stop incoming connections or redirect the connections. So you can check the other shortcut keys. They are always they provide an easier way of performing some of the functions in CLI. Some other functions that are important, for example, is the backspace button on your keyboard used to delete whatever is on the left of your cursor. Then when you want to move your cursor, character by character. To the left, you use the left keyboard arrow key. When you want to move it to the right, you use the right facing arrow key. Then in this particular example, we illustrate the use of the tab. So the tab is used for autocomplete. The tab is used for autocomplete. So for example here, we are in the system view and we type the keyword INTER. So when we press tab, because that word is unique within that particular view, it's gonna autocomplete that word. It's gonna autocomplete that word to the full keyword, which is interface. So this is one of the features that you should be using most of the time in order to avoid typing the entire commands, and it can also help you to remember and to avoid mistyping some of these command names. So the tab. Now, in case, for example, you have several commands that are starting with these letters, then pressing the tab will cycle through the list of those commands that start with the letters INTER. So it's important to remember that you press tab, it goes to the first keyword, tab again, the next keyword that starts with those 4 letters or 5 letters, tab again, like that. So that is what tab is used for. Then most operating systems will usually offer you what we call the help features. In particular, VRP offers you what we call partial help and complete help. So partial help and complete help. Complete help is when you cannot even remember the command that you really want to use. So you just want to explore around. And for that, you can just be on the interface view, on the user view, then you just press a question mark, space, then question mark, then enter. So it will provide you with a list of all the commands that are possible on this user view. The other form of complete help is this one. You remember the first part of the command, for example, display, but you don't remember the next part. So you can simply put a space, so display space, then question mark. So it will be able to bring you all the commands that are possible under display. Under the display command on that particular view. Now to partial help. Partial help is you remember maybe the keyword starts with a D, but you don't remember the entire keyword. So you do D and then question mark. So it will bring you all the commands that begin with a D. So this particular illustration here shows an example of a partial help. So we are doing question mark and then D without a space. So it will bring us in that view, in the system view. These are all the commands that begin with a D. So if you wanted, for example, to use the display command, then now you can go ahead and type the entire command. Under partial help again, you can use this kind of partial help. For example, display then H question mark. So you really want to display all the commands under display that begin with a H. So those are the two types of help features that are provided by VRP on the command line interface. As I mentioned earlier, the very first thing you should always do is to rename your device. The default name for Huawei network equipment is Huawei. So for you to be able to use the sysname command in order to configure the device name, you need to move from the user view to the system view. So you have to type the command system view. Then the keyword for configuring the name is sysname. Then you do a space, then you enter the name of that particular router. So when you press enter, that name will take effect immediately. So you can see that the prompt has changed from Huawei to RTA. So when you do, for example, HCIE or HCIP, you should be able to learn different naming methodologies that are used when you are designing and commissioning a network. But generally, the name should be used to uniquely identify each device within an enterprise network. So we have certain parameters that are used to create the name. For example, which floor the device is, which building, so that even when you're configuring it, you really know that you're configuring this particular device that is in this building and this floor. So when you do some research on the internet, you should be able to get that. Or when you do HCIP, you'll be able to learn that. But in the meantime, in this particular level, we'll just be naming our routers as either A, B, C, switches also as A, B, C. So for routers, most of the time we'll be using RT to stand for router and then A, RTA. For switches, SW, SWA, SWB, SWC, and so on and so forth. So you should always rename. Why? Because you'll be able to know that I'm configuring this device. Two people have raised their hands. Just go ahead. One of you can go first.
Yes, I have a question, Nicholas. Yes, I'm asking, in case you need to configure your router with two names, how do you space how do you use the spacing for the name? Do you just use a space, underscore, or do you space the two names?
So names have certain rules. One of them is that you cannot have spaces. So you can use a hyphen or an underscore, but you cannot have a space between routers. So for example, you can say admin hyphen third floor hyphen room this. So you can use those delimiters to space, but you cannot have a white space for a name. So thank you for reminding me that. Who else had a question? Is it Benson? Okay, thank you.
I had not lowered down my.
Oh, you had not lowered it. Oh, so always make sure you lower it so that you can enable me to see if any other person actually lifts up their hand. Okay, so the other configs that you can do include setting up your device time. And this should be done in order to ensure synchronization with the other network equipment that you have. So some of the parameters you can change in regard to the clock setting include the time zone, the date time, and the daylight saving time. So you can actually see from the notes how these particular parameters are used to maintain your system's time. So these are done under the user view, as you can see by that particular prompt. For example, when you want to change the time zone, you can do clock time zone. Then, for example, I think ours is GMT +3. So GMT add 03 for hours, 00 for minutes, hyphen full colon 00 for seconds. Then you can also set the date and the time. So this is the time here, starting with hours, minutes, and seconds. Then this is the date, starting with the year, then month, then day. If you want to see what you've configured in terms of the clock settings, you can use the command display clock, and it should be able to show you what you've really set up. So in the very next lab, these are some of the configurations that you're going to do to your device. Then we have these two messages. that are used for displaying notifications during the connection to a device. So the very first one is called the header login, and the other one is called header shell information. So the header login sets the header that is displayed on a terminal when a user is authenticated by a device. So just before you log in, you'll get a particular message just before you log in. So for example, here we've set the header login information using that command, header login information. Then we need to use a full colon, and in between we type the message that we want to be displayed. So for example, here we've typed the message, welcome to Huawei certification. So when you access the command line interface of your router or your switch, then you'll get that particular message just before you are authenticated, just before you provide the username and the password. You'll get that message. Okay, then the next one is the header shell. The header shell information sets the header that is displayed on a terminal after the user logs into the device. So again, we've set it like that. So the particular message, again, in between those two full colons, please don't reboot the device. So after you have been authenticated, that's the very first message you'll get before you get now that particular user view prompt. Now, most of the time, actually, these two commands are used for displaying either warning or legal notifications. So for example, for the header login, you can use it to put a legal message there. Like this is a private device. Any illegal access will attract legal action to the full extent of the law. Just to warn hackers that in case they manage to hack into your device, then okay, they should be alerted, so that actually that warning will be legally admissible in a court of law. Then for the header login shell, you want especially to provide some instructions or warnings, especially to junior network administrators, like don't reboot the device because it's on the live network. Okay. So in order to enhance the security of your devices, VRP commands are divided into what we call different user levels and command levels in order to ensure that you have security. So the user levels range from level 0 all the way to level 3, which can be also extended to level 15. From 3 to 15 is actually the same user level. Then the command level, we have command level 0, we have command level 1, command level 2, and command level 3. That's from 0 to 3. Command level 0 is a visit level. So visit level, you can only be able to do very few commands. For example, ping, trace route, those simple commands that can be used to diagnose simple network faults like reachability and delays. So that's what we call the visit level. Then monitoring level will allow majority of the display commands to be used. So for example, commands that can use to display the current together with the saved configuration and so on and so forth. Then configuration level, you can now be able to change parameters, systems parameters. And the last level here is the management level. You can be able to do all the other things and also be able to manage your switch. Managing means creating accounts, setting different user levels, and so on and so forth. So that's the management level. Now, in this particular example, we are moving into system view, and in system view, we are using this particular command. So command privilege level 3, view user save. So what this means is that we have a command called save, which can be accessed on the user view, as we are going to see. So we are simply saying that for you to use the save command, you must have a command privilege level of 3. So that means your user level must be between 3 and 15, because it is on this user level that you have all the command levels from 0 to 3. So in order for you to save any changes, you must be on the management level. So that is what we are doing here. Again, this is a common question in the exam. Now you might ask, why do we have a user level of 3 to 15? So sometimes you have the ICT manager and also the deputy ICT manager. So generally, you don't want a scenario, for example, what was happening on WhatsApp groups. That you create a group, you run it, and then at some point you add a friend, you make them an admin, then they remove you from the very group that you created, built, and added them into. So to avoid that, the ICT manager might have a level of 15, and maybe the deputy the level of 14, so that at no point can the deputy be able to actually remove this person whose level is 15. The other thing is, you cannot also be able to create a user with a user level that is greater than yours. So for example, if you're a senior network admin and you are on level 3, yes, you can be able to create a user, but you cannot create a user that has a privilege level or a user level of 4. So those are some of the security features that are included with that particular user level. Now, the command line interface provides us with 2 types of interfaces. One of them is called the console interface, and the next one is called the virtual teletype interface. So we have the console interface and the virtual teletype interface. So this one is commonly referred to as VTI. This one is commonly referred to as CON. Now, we already talked of the console interface or the console cable. So when you connect via the console cable, it will be able to give you an interface, and the relative number for that interface is 0, meaning that you only get one interface at a time, because you cannot connect more than one console cable in a router or a switch. So the console interface gives you just a single interface. On the other hand, the virtual teletype interface is actually a logical interface that you use when you want to connect to the device via telnet or SSH. SSH is a secure version of telnet. So we're also going to learn about telnet in a coming topic. So this particular interface can give you, you can have relative numbers all the way from 0 to 4. And when you have 0 to 4, it gives you 5 simultaneous interfaces. So 5 people can be able to log in through Telnet or SSH at the same time with the virtual teletype interface. However, with the VTY again, you can be able to extend that from 0 to 4 to 0 to 15. When you have 0 to 15, then it means you can have 16 interfaces at the same time. Now, in order for you to do that, you need to use a command called user interface maximum VTY 15. So it will increase the number of interfaces from 5 to 16. So that's the command. Now, in case this particular in case a VTY interface is configured with a maximum number, you use that command. User interface maximum VTY 0. So these will ensure that no users are allowed to log into the router or the switch using Telnet or SSH. So when you configure this, then you can only log into the switch or the router using the console interface. So you have to physically go and connect your network management system to the router or switch using a console cable or a USB cable. So it's important that you also remember that. The other thing to remember is, for example, when you've configured, for example, a maximum of 4 and 5 people are already connected to the switch or router using VTY, if a 6th person tries to log in via Telnet or SSH, they are not going to be allowed. They're not going to be allowed because all the number of usable interfaces will already have been used up. So it's important that we also understand that. Okay, so let's look at some of the other attributes for CLI that can be used to either extend its features or security. One of them is called the idle timeout. The idle timeout. So this one sets the timeout duration of the user connection. Timeout duration. So for how long? Can your SSH or Telnet interface be inactive before the connection is terminated? For how long? By default, this is usually set to 10 minutes. So you can always reduce it in order to improve security, so that in case a network engineer forgets to close the connection, someone else cannot take advantage of their machine and that particular connection to hack your systems. So that's the idle timeout. The other thing is the screen length. Screen length is the number of lines that are displayed on each terminal screen after a command is executed. By default, the default screen length is 24 lines. However, this can be extended to 512 lines. 512 lines. Then the next thing is the history command size buffer. So every command you typed is actually saved in the history command buffer. By default, sorry, excuse me. By default, 10 commands are saved, but 10 commands are saved, but you can extend this all the way to 256 commands. 256 commands. So it's important for you to understand about these attributes and especially their default values. So idle timeout 10 minutes. Screen length 24 lines. History command by default, it saves 10 commands. How do you access whatever has been saved on an history command buffer? You use the up arrow or the down arrow on your keyboard. Up arrow or down arrow. And again, this is a question I think I also saw in the exam. Now, other than using the up arrow and the down arrow, you can also use Control plus P to go up the history buffer, or Control plus N to go down the history command buffer. So Control plus P for, I think, previous, and N for next. So don't forget that. So what is happening in this particular example? Let's see. So we are moving to system view. Then we are creating a console interface. So user console 0. Then for the console interface, we are saying that we want to extend the history command buffer from 10 to 20. So the default is 10. So we want to extend it to 20. So the command is history-command space maximum-size, max-size, then space, then the value. In this particular example, we are also setting out the idle timeout. So we are setting it using the keyword idle-timeout, then the number of minutes and the number of seconds. So it is recommended that you put this at a lower value. Should be actually lower than the default. So that will improve the security of your system. So default 10 minutes, but here we are changing it to 1 minute 30 seconds. So if your console interface has been inactive for more than one minute and 30 seconds, the connection is actually terminated. Okay. Now, once you create, for example, a VTY interface, it provides an entry into your device. And in order for you to provide security to your VTY interface, you can do one of two things. Number one, you can restrict access. You restrict access. Number two, you can limit. What actions can be performed. Limit, sorry. So how do you do this? Now we have three types. We have three types of authentication. Authentication. We have three types of authentication for VTY interfaces. The first one is called non-authentication. Non-authentication is for you to access a VTY interface, you don't need to provide a username or a password. The second one is what you call password. Password authentication. With password authentication, you're required to provide a password. Then we have what we call the AAA authentication. So this is something we're going to, there's a topic about AAA which you're going to learn later. But with AAA authentication, you need to provide a username and a password. Sorry, and a password. So those are the three types of authentication that you need. So of course, for obvious security reasons, this one should never be used. The most recommended, AAA authentication. Why? It will be able to distinguish the different users using a username. So AAA authentication is mostly the one that is recommended. AAA authentication. So don't forget that. To limit access, to limit actions that can be performed after a user have logged in successfully, you need to configure the privilege level. So in this particular example, we go into the system view, we use the command user interface VTY0. So we want to configure this particular user interface. Excuse me. So we want to configure that. So we use the command user privilege level 2. So you know what level 2 is, the configuration level, I think. This user can only be able to do a number of things that are possible within that particular privilege level. Then in this particular case, we are using password authentication. So set authentication password cipher. That's the keyword that we use. Then it's gonna provide us a prompt where we can type the password. For example, Huawei 123. Okay. So let's move on. Here we are looking at an example of how to configure an interface. How to configure an interface. Now, an interface is simply a port. So this is an interface. This is also an interface. And generally, an interface, as I mentioned earlier, is normally defined by the name of the interface and the number of the interface. So for example here, G stands for gigabit Ethernet. So that's the name of the interface. The number of the interface is 0/0/0. So most likely in that particular router, we can also have 0/0/1. So the very first part, which is the name of the interface, will usually tell you the speed at which that interface can process data or transmit data. So gigabit Ethernet can do 1 gig per second. If the interface has the name Ethernet, then it can only do, I think, 100 megabits per second. So the name and the number. So that's what we call an interface. So let's see, how do we configure an interface? So here we are in router B. We are in router B, as you can see from that. So what we want to do is to configure an IP address on the interface G0/0/0 and also an IP address on the loopback interface. This is what you're calling a loopback interface. So we're going to see it. So in order to do that, we need to go into the system view from the user view. Then we need to type the keyword interface, then the name of the interface and the number of the interface. After that, we will get into the interface view. Then the command to configure an IP address is IP address, then the address that you want to configure and the subnet mask. So IP address 10.0.12.1 space 255.255.255.0. So that's how we configure an IP address for an interface. So we've configured this particular IP address for that interface. So /24 is 255.255.255.0. So after that, from the interface view, again, we can go into another interface called the loopback interface. So interface loopback 0. So that's gonna get us into the loopback interface 0 prompt. Then we can configure again an IP address for this particular interface. Now, what is a loopback interface? A loopback interface is a logical interface. Loopback interface is a logical interface. What do we mean when we say it's a logical interface? So we have the interface like 0/0/0. This is what we call a physical interface. So the physical interface is there. The logical interface is a virtual interface. It's just an interface that is created by software in order to an interface that is created with software in order to, what can I say? In order to be used for a particular purpose. Most protocols are use these particular interfaces to achieve their functionality, because the status of this interface will always be up. It cannot have any mechanical problems, unlike a physical interface, which can have a wire maybe cut or something, and it can have an issue and go down. So loopback interfaces will always, their status will always be up. So let me talk also about the interface status. And I think during the lab, you should be able to see this. So the status can be up or it can also be down. And in particular, I think we have two statuses. I cannot be able to remember. I cannot be able to remember the first one, but let me just call it this, but I don't think it's correct. So the physical status, and I think the next one which I'm remembering, I think is the protocol status. The protocol status. So protocol status is when you've configured, for example, an IP address, then the protocol status will be up. When you've not configured an IP address, the protocol status will be down. The physical status is when you've connected this interface to a link. Then the status will be up. Sometimes you might have configured, connected it to a link, but you've used the shutdown command. When you use the shutdown command on an interface, even though you've connected it to a link, then the status will turn from up to down. And when you've not connected an interface to a link, then the status will be down. But when you've connected it to a link and you use the shutdown command on it, the status will change from up to down. In order for you to change the status to up again, you need to use the command undo shutdown. Undo shut. So you can also use part of a command rather than use the entire full word if that part of the command is unique within that particular prompt. So for example, for shutdown, we can use undo shutdown. Sorry, undo shut, like that. So this will change the status from down to up. So I said, when you create a loopback interface, the status will always be up. These very first status here. Remember, it's a logical interface, so it's not going to be connected to a link. So automatically, the status will always be up once you create the loopback interface. So it's important for us to remember that. But for a physical interface, for it to change the status to up, you need to connect it to another interface, to another device using a physical medium. Okay. So I think that is it. Ladies and gentlemen, that is it about this topic. Nicholas, you can help us with the first one. Then Oyo can help us with the next one. So Nicholas, go ahead. Hello, are you there? Yes, go ahead.
Yes, sure. How many users are able to connect via the console interface at any given time? To me, I'm not sure.
Ade? Sorry, I think my internet has an issue.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Go ahead.
Yeah, most of them. How many users are able to connect via the console interface at any given time? It should be one user.
Thank you.
That is according to me.
Okay. Yeah, that is correct. That is correct. That's why the relative number is just 0.
Yeah.
And you can only connect one console cable to a device. So only one user can connect at any given time. Thank you very much, Nick.
The second question is,
I think for the next one we can have Oyo. Oyo, are you there? If Oyo, okay, Oyo, I think he has muted his mic. Go ahead, Oyo.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Part 2 is, what is the status of the loopback interface 0 when the command loopback interface 0 is used? I think the status will be physical status.
It will be up or down?
It should be up.
Exactly. So when you create a loopback interface, the status by default will always be up. Especially, nimesahau the exact word, but when we do the practical, I'll show you that exact word. So thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much, Nick and Oyo, for that. We now move on to the next topic.